Namaste and welcome to another day of Global Festival of Oneness. This is the 4th year we have been celebrating the Global Oneness Festival, and we have been having this almost for past 1 month from Shankaracharya Jayanti, and we have only 2 days of festival left. It's a great pleasure to welcome Sri Krishnapani Kesiraju today for giving a conversation, for leading the discourse on Jiddu Krishnamurti's commentary and Jiddu Krishnamurti's work, and compare it with Advaita Vedanta in the context and in the light of Shankara Bhagavadpada. And it is a pleasure to welcome Krishnapani Kesiraju. He is a mechanical engineering graduate with professional qualifications in management and also in law. He has over 40 years of experience in industry and academia. He runs his own trading and consulting company. He's studied ancient philosophical and spiritual literature, and research of this area is his passion. He is trying to synthesize ancient and modern thought on deeper aspects of life and its purpose, and is a keen student of theosophy as well as Jiddu Krishnamurti's teachings. Sri Krishnapani ji is an invited speaker at various business, management, and spiritual forums. And with great pleasure, I invite you to this forum, sir. I'm looking forward to hearing you. So you take about 50 minutes, and then questions which they come up, I will take them up in the end. We'll have a conversation. And the forum is yours. Please.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Prasad Garu. I have a small PowerPoint presentation also, which I'll share later.
Please.
Before that, I would like to make some introductory remarks. Primarily, what I'm going to discuss today or present to you is not a typical academic discourse or a comparative study of Adi Shankara's Advaita with the teachings of Jiddu Krishnamurti. Basically, I consider this, for me personally, this is a serious approach to the writings of both the great personages as an endeavor towards a deeper understanding of truth. Krishnaji always emphasized on the need to meeting at the same level, at the same time, with the same intensity, to really understand life and come upon that which he called as the other, the nameless, or the truth, and so on. In fact, this form of meeting at the same level, at the same time, with the same intensity, in his words, he calls it as true communion. Now, I have been a student of Sanskrit for a very long time, and I had the privilege of studying under great scholars, but still I consider myself as a novice with some basic knowledge of this Deva Bhasha. I continue to study Sanskrit at a very leisurely pace now for the sheer beauty it unfolds and the happiness I derive from it. When I was in the school, maybe at the age of 13, 14, I had learned the verses of the 2nd chapter and the 12th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita by heart. But it was only about 5 or 6 years back that I undertook the study of Bhagavadgitabhashya of Sri Adi Shankara in the original. Jiddu Krishnamurti always used to advise those who came to meet him or who would quote scriptures and all, he would always ask them whether they have read it in the original. He would particularly ask them to read the originals and not translations and translations of translations and so on, which are available now. In fact, Jiddu Krishnamurti was averse to the very idea of reading the so-called spiritual texts without being able to observe one's own mind and thoughts. He would often say that one should read the book of life. Now, this statement reminds me of a very beautiful verse from Viveka Chudamani, which is a very beautiful Prakarana Grantha of Adi Shankara, or a preliminary text on Advaita, wherein he says, Avijñāte pare tattve shastradhitistu nishphala. Vijñātepi pare tattve shastradhitistu nishphala. He said, without knowing the essence, the very core of spirituality, it is a fruitless, it is a futile endeavor to study the scripture. And at the same time, if you already know the core, then also it is futile. In either case, it is futile. The interesting part of it is that he is drawing our attention to the fact that one needs to have a serious approach to know the core. It's not as though that study is not important, but study should not be for display or your own scholarship or understanding of it, because that serves no purpose from a spiritual perspective. In the same way, Viveka Chudamani, he mentions that also. Vakvaikhari, Shabdajhari, Shastra Vyakhyana Kaushalam, Vaidushyam Vidusham Tadvat Bhuktaye Natu Muktaye, he says. See, we are mostly caught in words. We are enamored by words. We are the eloquence of a speaker. But that has very little significance from a spiritual perspective. In fact, Krishnamurti himself says, so don't let us be caught in words. Leave that to the professional lecturers, he says. And in fact, he has gone to the extent of saying that if you are repeating somebody's words, you are a propagandist. And he called a propagandist as a liar. It's something that appears to be very harsh in some ways, but that's what he actually meant, that don't repeat somebody, don't quote somebody. Well, we are really fond of doing that, showing off our scholarship and so on and so forth, but that's not the intention. The intention is that your study should lead to deeper understanding. And deeper understanding can always be shared. That is the kind of significance he gave to words. In fact, both Adi Shankara and Jiddu Krishnamurti speak in the same tone. Adi Shankara was also quite harsh when he said, Vakvaikhari Shabdajhari Shastra Vyakhyana Kaushalam. He himself says, Vaidushyam Vidusham Tadvat. The scholarship of such people is only for their own sustenance and not for mukti. Now, one of the reasons for me to undertake this study of the Bhagavadgitabhashya in the original was this particular exhortation of Jiddu Krishnamurti to read the scriptures in the original, number one. And secondly, I happened to meet one of the trustees of the Jiddu Krishnamurti Foundation in India, a very senior gentleman, Pandit Krishnanathji. And during my talk with him, I was interacting with him, and he mentioned a very interesting fact about what came about during his discussions with Jiddu Krishnamurti. In fact, Jiddu Krishnamurti, it seems, asked him whether somebody can translate his talks into Upanishadic Sanskrit. So that very question gives us an inkling into the fact as to what is the level at which Krishnamurti understood the Upanishads and the expressions of the Upanishads. Though he never quoted any scriptures, never talked about any of these things, but he had the deeper understanding and he could know the essence of the Upanishads and the way the expressions are there in the Upanishads. So this was another inspiring factor which spurred me to study scriptures in the original. Obviously, each one's level of understanding is the limiting factor. So my understanding is my limiting factor. I cannot have the understanding of a person who may be having a much deeper insight into things. But these were the two reasons which spurred me to take up the study of Bhagavadgitabhashya, which I did almost for about 6 months. I was reading only the Bhagavadgitabhashya of all the, from end to end. Now, coming to another point, Jiddu Krishnamurti was also against any form of discipline when it came to spiritual understanding, especially the so-called spiritual practices. However, he did not mean the need for, did not mean that there was no need for the basic discipline in one's daily life. He himself was a very disciplined person. Very regularly, he used to practice yoga and pranayama for 2 hours every day in the morning. And he was very punctual in starting his talks. Exactly on the dot, he would start his talk. And sometimes when there was a possibility of delay also, he would not allow that to happen. And he said, he used to say that it's an insult to the audience if I do not go there on time. And that was the thing. So he was, sometimes because his statements may be misleading, where he said that he was not very fond of this term discipline. But a very prolific writer, Professor Ravi Ravindra, he mentioned in one of his books that when Krishnaji was interacting with some students, they were making a lot of noise and moving here and there and not listening to him. Then he said, you don't have, Krishnaji, it seems, was vexed, and he said, you don't have discipline. This was an opportunity for Professor Ravi Ravindra. He caught him and said, sir, you have always been saying that you don't want discipline and you are against discipline. And Krishnaji said, I never said about basic discipline. You know, see, as he said, if somebody is talking to him, he would listen to him with great intensity. And he would expect the same. So there are certain elements where there is a possibility of misunderstanding Krishnamurti if we do not delve deeper into his teachings and his talks. And when it came to the idea of understanding, he used certain times very specifically about what he called as understanding. Now, he mentioned or spoke extensively on the fallacy of time as a factor for understanding or self-knowledge. He says, understanding myself is not a matter of time. Similarly, the statement that the very understanding leads to the dropping of anything was also very interesting. But here, we need to understand what does he mean by dropping instantaneously when understanding dawns. I recall another incident when I was discussing with a person who was very close to Krishnaji. In one context, somebody asked him in a small private group as to how much time would you require to get rid of a habit. Then Krishnaji said, maybe it will take 3 or 4 days or a week. Everybody was surprised. He said, sir, you have always been saying that understanding and dropping of it happens instantaneously. And why do you require time for, getting rid of a habit? Then he said, the actual understanding and dropping of it happens instantaneously. But the fact of the matter is that in order to understand or observe the nature of the habit and look at it from an integrated perspective from all points of view requires time. So you see, in certain cases, he would, some of his talks, he would call it as preparing the ground. The preparing of the ground takes time, and that's what we need to do. He would emphasize on the fact that you need not do anything. You prepare the ground in all possible manners so that the seed is sown and it grows naturally and spontaneously. So when we talk about understanding the fallacy of time as a factor for understanding, we should know that what he meant was the preparation that is required for this understanding, preparing the field, is very important for our purpose. Then, coming back to my subject of today, during the course of my study, I have been able to identify at least 58 references in both the Bhagavad Gita verses and the commentary or bhashya of Adi Shankara, which seem to indicate an identity of thought with the statements of Jiddu Krishnamurti. Now, during the course of this talk, for the next maybe half an hour, I'll present to you a few important references to highlight this factor. I would now like to share the screen with you of my PowerPoint presentation. Hope you are all able to see the screen. Yeah. At the very beginning of the commentary, which Adi Shankara starts with the 11th verse of the second chapter. In fact, there is no much commentary. There is no commentary on the first chapter at all. But he starts with the 11th sloka of the second chapter. And in that context, he says, Tasmat Gita Shastre Kevalat Eva Tattvajnanat Moksha Praptihi Na Karma Samuchitat Iti Nischitaha Arthaha. He emphasizes the fact and propounds his fundamental approach of Advaita at the very beginning and says that only through Tattva Jnana that one can attain liberation, and not through the series of actions with which one is involved in daily life and also in the spiritual practices. Now, Adi Shankara uses these two terms, Tattva Jnana and Atma Jnana, as synonyms, because in another context he says, Anyatra Atma Jnanat Uddharanam Apasyan. Krishnamurti also frequently uses the term self-knowledge and in some instances the word self-awareness. This is what I relate to as Tattva Jnana or Atma Jnana. Now, only when the mind is tranquil through self-knowledge and not through imposed self-discipline, only then, in that tranquility, in that silence, can reality come into being. Self-knowledge has no end. You don't come to an achievement. You don't come to a conclusion. It is an endless river. Whereas if one is able to understand oneself and thereby bring about that creative happiness, that experience of something that is not of the mind, then perhaps there can be a transformation in the immediate relationship about us and so in the world in which we live. This is from his talk, What Are We Seeking? This is the second chapter of the book, The First and Last Freedom. Now, we can see the emphasis on self-knowledge and self-awareness as the only means, and no other means would be of any consequence in understanding oneself. or in bringing about a transformation in oneself. And that too, this experience of something that is not of the mind. Here it is a matter of direct perception, which he is talking about. So you can see the parallel in the expressions of Adi Shankara and the quote which I have just now read out. Then we come to another important thing, which is a commentary on the 16th verse of the second chapter. The 16th verse is Nasato vidyate bhavo nabhavo vidyate satah ubhayorapi drushtontas tvanayos tattvadarshibhihi. He is talking about the non-existence of asat and the eternal existence of sat. In that context, Adi Shankara says, Yad Vishaya Buddhihi na Vyabhicharati tat sat. Yad Vishaya Vyabhicharati tat asat. Iti sadasad vibhage buddhi tantre sthite sarvatra dve buddhi sarvaihi upalabhyete samanadhikarane. That alone, I have given the translation of this quote or this commentary, which says that alone is real whose cognition is not mutable. And that is unreal whose cognition proves mutable. Thus, the distinction between the real and the unreal rests on cognitions. Throughout the sphere of experience, the two cognitions with an identical substratum are available to one and all. Now, Jiddu Krishnamurti states that the mind and all its content is limited, fragmented, and partial, and therefore ever-changing and mutable. On the other hand, he refers to intelligence. In other terms, we can call it as reality or sat, which is immutable. And in a dialogue with Professor David Bohm, he states that the source of thought and intelligence is one and the same. That's what Adi Shankara also says. Throughout the sphere of experience, the two cognitions with an identical substratum, the substratum is the same. One is a cognition with the senses and the faculty of mind. And another cognition of that reality is through intelligence, through it, which is going beyond the mind. So he draws, you can see the similarity in expression about the two forms of cognition. Then a very interesting link I have seen is about negation of all actions. In the commentary on verse 21 of the second chapter, the 21st verse is Veda Vinashanam and so on and so forth. I don't want to go into that. But here the most important part is the commentary of Adi Shankara, which says, Yatvarthasya cha avikriyatvasya cha avikriyatvasya tulyatvat vidushaha sarvakarma pratishedha eva prakaranarthaha abhiprayataha bhagavataha. The immutability of the self being the same for negating all actions on its part. The Lord here conveys the idea of negation of all actions by a knower of the self. Jiddu Krishnamurti, in the talk which I have quoted, which is of 10th November 1968 in Claremont College, California, he says, so complete negation is complete action. Negating all actions of the mind, of the senses, that would be the true action, which resonates with the idea presented by Adi Shankara when he says negation of all actions by a knower of the self. Then we come to another factor. Nahi niravayamam kinchit vikriyatmakam drushtam. Nothing partless is known to mutate. That which is whole, complete, integrated is not subject to change. Krishnamurti would often quote this, would say complete, total, whole. The reason is that the mind, as I mentioned earlier, is something which is very limited, very partial, and very fragmented. Whereas intelligence, or that reality, or that which is partless, is something which is integrated. Then another factor that comes to our mind when we study Krishnamurti is his emphasis on attention and inattention. The 41st verse of the second chapter itself is a very good indication or very good example of this. Vyavasayatmika buddhi rekeha kurunandana bahushakha hyanantascha buddhayo avyavasayinam. For a person who is with inattention, his mind roams in all directions. Whereas Sri Krishna emphasizes and says, Arjuna, make your, bring all your senses and your mind and everything together in attention. So this particular verse refers to the subject of attention and inattention. And Adi Shankara goes on to quote again, in his commentary, he says, Atmavan apramattaha bhavaha. Atmavan means apramattaha bhavaha. Apramattaha means one who is totally attentive, who is not deviating from anything, who is not, dispersed and dissipating his energy. Now, here also I remember another interesting thing which Professor Ravi Ravindra in one of his books has noted, that in one of the conversations with Jiddu Krishnamurti, he said, Krishnaji, my attention wavers. The immediate response of Krishnaji was, sir, attention does not waver. It is inattention that wavers. That's why it is called as pramada. In some of the South Indian languages, especially in Telugu, pramada means an accident, which is a derivative meaning that if you are inattentive, accidents happen. So, attention is a very significant word. And in the Udyoga Parva of Mahabharata, there is a very beautiful reference of Sanat Sujatiya, wherein he says, Pramado vai mrutyumiti bravimi. He says, inattention is death. Inattention leads to decay, dissipation of all energy, and progressively it leads to death. So that is the significance of being Atmavan and Apramatta, which was repeatedly emphasized by Krishnaji when he was calling it as attention. He was using this term attention in contrast with the word concentration. He used to say that concentration is exclusive, whereas attention is all-inclusive. And inattention, he says, is what wavers and not attention. Then, when it comes to action, there is in the commentary on the 69th verse of the second chapter, Adi Shankara says, Tasmat na atmavidaha karmani adhikaraha iti siddham. So, therefore, in the case of one who knows the self, he has no obligation to perform any action whatsoever, and he does not, in fact, perform action that way, as we understand. Now, to draw a parallel with Jiddu Krishnamurti's statements, I'm drawing your attention to two statements which he used to make. He would say, I do not act. It is the intelligent which acts through me. Where sometimes the audiences used to put very tricky questions to him and give him a hypothetical situation and say, what would you do in such a situation? Then his answer was, sir, I do not act in any situation. I allow that intelligence to act through me, and whatever that intelligence dictates, I act in that manner. Quite often he also used to put this question, can one lead a totally purposeless life? Now, when he says purposeless, it is to be understood in this context of a person who knows the self, who is an Atmavid. For him, there is no direction or goal or purpose or objective for acting. His action is essentially dictated by that intelligence, and as the Bhagavad Gita also says, it is solely for the purpose of Loka Sangraha, for the welfare of the humanity as a whole. It's not directed with any motive, with any purpose, with any goal or objective in mind. Action flows naturally, and that action always happens to be the right action. Now, another verse to which I am drawing your attention is in the verse 20 of chapter 4. It says, Nityatrupto Nirashrayaha, which means eternally content and independent. When Adi Shankara, when he gives his commentary on the word ekaki, he uses the term asahayaha. Asahayaha does not mean helpless. Asahayaha means one who is totally independent, alone, and is not dependent for anything on anybody outside. Because he is eternally content in himself. And he is not resting or dependent on any external means. In that context, the translation, the commentary says, Ashrayaha nama yat ashritya purushartham sisadhaishyati drishtadrishteshta phala sadhanasraya rahitaha ityarthaha vidusha kriyamanam karma paramarthataha akarma eva tasya nishkriyatma darshana sampannatvat. The translation of this is, dependence refers to the external means, relying on which goals are sought to be reached. The sense is that he has no reliance on means to ends, seen and unseen. Work done by the knower is, in reality, non-work, for he has already achieved the realization of the self that acts not. That self, I have put it with a capital S, it does not act. So you see, when Krishnaji used to say purposeless life or effortless action, this is what he meant according to me. I understand it in this manner. Then, Vigatecha bhayakrodhaha yaha evam vartate sada sanyasi mukta eva saha natasya mokshaha anyaha kartavyaha asti. This is a commentary on verse 28 of chapter 5. From him have departed desire, fear, and wrath. Vigatecha bhayakrodhaha. A true renouncer who lives thus is indeed liberated. No other liberation is there for him to accomplish. This is an interesting idea which we need to understand from a deeper point of view. Liberation is not a product or an outcome or a result of something, or it is not something to be accomplished, and it is not a one-off thing that, like you are passing your SSC examination, which we do only once in a lifetime. It's not that way, because it is something living, something dynamic, and it is something like a eternally flowing river. In this context, he says he is one who has completely dropped desire, fear, and wrath. in a lecture given in the year 1977 in California at the Krishnamurti Foundation America Center in Ohio, it seems there were about 3,000 or 4,000 people in the audience. And Jiddu Krishnamurti suddenly said, "Do you want to know my secret?" Everybody became suddenly attentive. And Krishnamurti said, "I don't mind what happens. That is the essence of inner freedom. It is a timeless spiritual truth. Release attachment to outcomes. Deep inside yourself, you will feel good no matter what." Because he is completely free of desire, fear, and wrath. If we examine ourselves, we see that only these two things, desire and fear, are the driving factors in every aspect of our life. So unless one is free of it, one cannot make this statement that I don't mind what happens. All mental constructions have to be discarded and dropped. Nahyasanyasta sankalpo yogi bhavati kaschana. This is in reference to commentary on the second verse of 6th chapter. None indeed who has not discarded mental constructions can become a yogi. Then, Suhrun mitrarya aryudasina madhyastha veshya bandhushu sadhushvapicha papeshu samabuddhir vishishyate. The translation is, he excels whose mind or perception is the same in respect of good men, friends, foes, indifferent persons, neutrals, antagonists, relations, the righteous and the unrighteous. In fact, another anecdote I recall is, it seems a billionaire came to attend one of the talks of Jiddu Krishnamurti in Saanen in Switzerland, and he was a tobacco baron. His business was in the field of tobacco. He was a manufacturer of cigarettes and so on and so forth. He sought an audience with Krishnamurti. But when Krishnamurti gave him an audience, in fact, that gentleman was talking so passionately about his tobacco business. Everybody was surprised, but Krishnamurti was fully attentive to him. Whatever he was saying about his tobacco business, he was listening to him very attentively. You see, the same kind of attention, whether it is with respect to a good person or a friend or a foe or an indifferent person or an antagonist or a righteous or an unrighteous person, has absolutely nothing, it has no effect on him. Similarly, nirvairaha, nirgatavairaha, sarvabhuteshu, shatrubhavarahitaha, atmanaha, atyanta apakara pravritteshvapi. Even those who have done great harm to somebody, great harm to oneself, to not bear any ill will or enmity towards such a person is another quality which we see. This is again a quote from the commentary of Adi Shankara. And he also mentions about who is a person who can be called as truly compassionate or karunaha. He says a compassionate person is one who gives that sense of protection, that sense of freedom from fear to everyone who comes in contact with him. And in fact, we can say that Jiddu Krishnamurti is a living example of these statements. The first statement I have already mentioned about the tobacco baron. The second statement being totally free of any sense of enmity or hatred. In fact, there were two incidents in Jiddu Krishnamurti's life. Once he was thrown out of the Theosophical Society. In fact, physically his baggage was removed from the place where he was staying, though he was not well. But he never bore any ill will towards it. Similarly, he was involved in a legal case. He was involved in a litigation with regard to copyright of his talks and all. In that context also, he bore no ill will towards the person with whom he was involved in such things. And a true example of giving this kind of protection or the sense of fearlessness to anybody who comes in contact with him, Krishnamurti himself made a statement that whenever he got into an aircraft, he had that sense of protection around him, that nothing is going to happen to this aircraft. So you see the point. What I'm trying to make is that not only he is protected in that context, but whoever is traveling in that plane along with him is also protected. That is the nature of compassion. Adi Shankara therefore says, Karunaha, one who is compassionate is Sarvabhuta Abhayapradaha. He gives that sense of protection and sense of freedom from fear for all living creatures. That in that sense, we can find these parallels in his life, apart from his teachings. Now we come to another interesting thing, which is the commentary on the 66th verse of the 18th chapter, which is considered as the Charama Shloka of the Bhagavad Gita. Sarva dharman parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja aham tva sarva papebhyo mokshaishyami mashuchaha. In that context, Adi Shankara says, Akaryatvacha nishreyasasya karma sadhanatva anupapattihi nahi nityam vastu karmana jnanena va kriyate. Ataha kevalam eva jnanam nishreyasa sadhanam iti. Ayatna siddham kaivalyam iti. The translation is, as moksha is not a product, it is unreasonable to hold that its means is action or karma. An eternal entity cannot be produced either by works or by knowledge. Therefore, only self-knowledge is the means to liberation. Kevalam eva jnanam, kevalam jnanam. True and complete self-knowledge or self-awareness is the means to liberation. Therefore, moksha comes into being effortlessly. Ayatna siddham kaivalyam. You do not make any effort for kaivalya. Adi Shankara says, all knowledge is to remove the veil of ajnana. It is basically meant for removing the veil of ajnana and not for attainment of jnana, because jnana is ever present, is eternal, it is always there, and it is not a product of your effort. It is not because you are making an effort that you are attaining kaivalya. Kaivalya, or that liberation or moksha or emancipation or nishreyas or whatever you call it as, whether Krishnamurti calls it as the nameless or the other or truth, is eternally there. It is not something which is brought into existence as a part of the effort one makes, and therefore effort has no place in attaining kaivalya, or because it is something which comes to you. There is no going forth and meeting it or attaining it. It is something which is already there, and one simply realizes it without making any effort whatsoever. And effortlessness is one thing which Krishnamurti always used to emphasize. And what I would like to end with two very important quotes of Krishnamurti, which he made in the year 1934. He says, you have sown the seeds of awareness, and that produces the flower of intelligence. You don't need to do anything else. You have to sow the seeds of awareness, become self-aware, and that itself will produce the flower of intelligence. This is from the talk with the title, The Significance of Environment, given at Ojai, California on June 17, 1934. And finally, another quote, he himself says, I say, there is this living reality, call it God, truth, or what you like, and it cannot be found or realized through search. Therefore, it is ayatna siddham. No effort on your part can lead to it, because it is something which is a living reality, whatever name you give it, God or truth or whatever you like. It cannot be found or realized through search. What one can do is to prepare the ground. Only sadhana is limited, or your effort is limited to the extent of preparing the ground. Nothing beyond that. If you expect, if you anticipate, if you imagine something, it is only the product of your mind and nothing else. Because what this living reality is something which is beyond the mind, beyond the thought. And therefore, he says it is important to silence the mind, or to empty the content of one's own consciousness, for that to enter, for that to come in. So I would like to end with these two quotes, which I have tried to correlate with what Adi Shankara said when he talked about ayatna siddham kaivalyam, and it is only kevala jnana through which one is truly liberated. So thank you so much. We will now open up for any discussion or question and answers.
Wonderful talk, Sandy. Very nice, Krishnapani Garu. I really enjoyed actually listening to you. I'm very familiar with both Krishnaji's writings as well as Shankara Bhagavadpada's commentary on Bhagavad Gita. But the way in which you correlated Krishnaji's statements as well as Shankara Bhagavadpada's commentary on Gita is admirable. I learned a lot of different perspectives that I have not seen. Especially considering that Krishnaji is considered to be more of a Buddhist, and he does not talk about Atma, he does not talk about Advaita or any of them explicitly. You bringing in these two Samanvayam is very nice.
In fact, but the reason why Krishnaji never talked about these things is because he said, for so many millennia, it hasn't helped you. It hasn't helped humanity. So he wanted to divest it of all these so-called traditions and unnecessary accretions that have come about, where we have lost the understanding of the truth.
Yes.
That was the reason why he mentioned that can somebody translate his talks into Upanishadic Sanskrit? Because he knew the significance of it. And his emphasis on studying the original was precisely for this reason, because that gives you a true insight into it.
Exactly.
There are, as I mentioned, I could only glean about 8 to 10 aspects of it, but I have identified about 58 different sources, different references in the Bhagavad Gita, which I have noted.
I think it will be wonderful if you can write a book on this, or you give a series of talks in this particular area. I think it will be of immense interest.
And there are several quotes from the Upanishads also which resonate with Krishnaji, especially in the Mandukya Upanishad, in the Taittiriya Upanishad, and there are very significant statements which very clearly resonate the thought of Jiddu Krishnamurti.
Have you been writing up some of these, at least as articles or giving YouTube talks? I think there will be a lot of people who might be very interested in doing the Samanvayam between different teachers of completely different ages, and they are considered to be of different traditions, but coming to the same truth is really, really wonderful. Let me go to some questions which we have. Go ahead. Please, if you want to answer it first, please go ahead. The first question, Mr. Ashok Khanna asks, what is Variti and Pratya with reference to Chit?
I think this is out of the context right now, because I never referred to Chit as such. Now, Chit is a very interesting word by itself.
Right.
So it is one of the three aspects of the ultimate reality, Sat, Chit and Ananda. And Chit, when it is limited through a kind of embodiment,
yeah,
it becomes Chitta.
Chitta. Yeah, right.
Chitta is a medium actually. Chitta is a medium for the expression of that ultimate reality through the embodied consciousness.
Yeah.
So I would not like to go much into these aspects because I think that is out of context. I am also not able to understand these terms variti or variti and pratya.
Okay.
I have not come across these two terms, or it should be pratyaya and vritti, if I understand.
Possible.
I do not know. Ashok Khannaji, you may try to clarify whether you're referring to vritti and pratyaya. That's a different subject by itself, because I have been giving
Sankhya and yoga.
Yeah, I have been giving in a different forum. I was giving a series of talks on the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, where I have we can delve deeper into these two terms, pratyaya and vritti. Okay, pratyaya, according to the yogic philosophy, is any particular object which can be physical or psychological for the purpose of dharana. I would not like to go much into it. Ashok Khannaji, that is a topic.
So we can ask him to clarify that. There is a comment by Srimati Vijaya Jayaraman, Neti Neti. She says really preparing the ground is fabulous. There is no specific question that she raises.
It's about that negation of all actions.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Mahesh ji raises, if it is eternal and not realized through any effort and mind, and if that has no goals, then sir, what is the purpose and how does it affect our life?
No, the Mahesh ji, the primary concern of Jiddu Krishnamurti has always been observing oneself without interference, without any kind of disturbance in the process. In the sense, pure observation without interference of oneself leads to a very deep understanding. What we normally do as a mental exercise is, we give energy and direction to every thought. If we examine oneself, if I examine myself, I see that when a thought arises, I give energy to it and I also lead it in a particular direction. Therefore, in one context, I have called this as a vector. Anyone with some basic knowledge of physics will know that a vector is something which has both energy or what do you call as magnitude and direction. The thought also has got the same thing. Thought has both magnitude in the form of energy and direction. Now, Krishnaji used to make a very interesting observation where he would say that if you are observing your own thoughts, that process itself will slow down the number of thoughts. Number one. Number two, when you're not feeding it with any energy, it will exhaust its own energy and drop it. And another thought arises. And he very interestingly called the silence between two thoughts as meditation.
Yeah.
So that is the purpose.
Yeah.
See, the point is when I observe myself, don't make an extraordinary external effort to understand. The only effort is to prepare oneself to observe without interference.
Yeah.
So then what happens is one understands the very nature of that thought, the nuances of that thought, the frequency and the aggression and the number of thoughts, all of them will come down.
Yeah.
And in that process, each thought will exhaust its own energy and drop. and another thought arises. So that the silence between two thoughts, that can be expanded, and that he calls it as meditation.
Meditation and awareness. Yeah. Thought is time, he says at some
Yeah,
level.
thought is time.
The mind. Yeah.
Yeah. Thought and time, he would say, is one and the same. Thought is the past. Thought
right.
is also the me.
Right.
Because the thinker and the thought are not two different things, he would
Correct.
say.
Yeah, exactly. There are some more questions.
Thank you very much for this profound synthesis of Krishnaji and Advaita. What is the role of spiritual organizations if the attainment is not in time, and the role of do's and don'ts in sadhana? See, what happens is dependence on organizations, especially for psychological or spiritual purposes, is the bane of any person as such, because this journey is an inward journey, and you cannot depend on anything external to you for this purpose. The only thing that you can do for external purposes is a study which acts as a pointer. Krishnaji used to say that I am like a pointer. I am like a sign on the signboard on the road pointing in a particular direction.
Yes.
Now, what happens with the case of spiritual organizations and spiritual leaders is, we don't travel in the direction of the pointer, but we sit at the pointer and start worshipping the pointer.
Yes, exactly.
So if I sit at the pointer and go on praising it, saying that you are the best pointer, I have never seen a pointer like you, you are the biggest pointer, you are the best pointer and all that, it's like worshipping a person and not allowing him to go anywhere, and we ourselves are not interested in going anywhere. That's precisely the reason why Krishnamurti used to say that the Guru destroys the disciple and the disciple destroys the Guru.
Yeah.
Because the Guru is not external, and this is not something new.
Yeah.
The Dakshinamurti Stotra very clearly says that the Guru is inside. The Guru is the inner ruler, immortal. That's what we need to understand.
Yeah.
And that embodiment is what is important. Yeah. And when it comes to sadhana, sir, the simple point is, we have very successfully, as we grow up, we have killed our conscience. Yeah. I used to point this out and say, even a child knows the do's and don'ts. Right. It is once we have killed our conscience, we are involved in ideas, concepts, theories, hypotheses, and so on and so forth. Right. True sadhana is the preparation of the ground. And the preparation of the ground starts with one's own self, and self-knowledge and self-awareness and self-observance. That observation is what is important. And if you would like to call that as sadhana, I have no dispute with it. Right. But it has a limitation of its own.
Right. Okay. So there is another question, says, so then no organization can give us the spiritual attainment.
Yes. Yes.
It can only be found within. Is that a reasonable thing to say? I suppose same speaker. Yeah. You can say that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You are absolutely right.
So there is another question. He says, JK is appropriate for somebody with Chitta Suddhi and Ekagrata, whereas Bhagavad Gita resonates with one with Malam, Vikshepa and Avarana. Is that a fair comment?
See, Vikshepa and Avarana are technical terms.
Technical terms.
From the Prakarana Granthas. These are two technical terms associated with Maya. Maya has the Avarana Shakti. First of all, it veils the truth. Second, it projects the untruth. Veiling the truth is Avarana, and projecting the false is Vikshepa. Throwing. Vikshepa means projecting or throwing. These two are actually technical terms connected with Maya. But the Bhagavad Gita itself says, Mama Maya Duratyaya. He says that Maya is also mine. And it is something which cannot be so easily conquered. So you see, Chitta Shuddhi and Ekagrata are very typical Indian terms. From one point of view, the only purpose is self-purification, or the only sadhana that is required from the traditional point of view, if you see, is self-purification, which Krishnamurti used to say that get rid of everything that is inessential. That is what is tapas. Tapas is burning away all that is inessential, all that is of no purpose. So what remains by burning away all inessentials is the pure essence of it. That's what is the meaning of tapas. So you see that's the process of Chitta Shuddhi. And Ekagrata has got certain issues related to that. As I mentioned earlier, Krishnaji used to mention about attention rather than concentration. Mm-hmm. For the simple reason that he would say that concentration is exclusive. You are eliminating everything else and focusing on something particular. Whereas his emphasis was on all-inclusive attention. When giving his talks also, he would say, are you able to hear the birds chirping? Are you able to hear the noise of on the street? Are you able to hear the chattering around you? That means he wanted you to become attentive to everything simultaneously,
right,
without being affected by them.
Yeah.
So you see, we can bring about that samanvaya, as Prasadji mentioned, by a proper understanding of Jiddu Krishnamurti and the ancient Indian scriptures, and also the aspect of illusion. Because when the mind is limited, fragmented, and partial, it can only create illusion and nothing else. So therefore, Krishnamurti would say you empty the content of consciousness,
right,
completely, so that you provide a space to fill in that truth to come in.
Right.
It's like the same story about a Zen Buddhist monk, a master pouring tea into a cup and going on continuing to pour even though it's full. When the disciple asks him, sir, why are you doing this? Then he says, your mind is like this cup, it's already full. Please empty it and come if you want something new.
Right.
So we have to relate this illusion of the mind caused by seeing the fact that the mind is limited, partial, and fragmented is not at all a difficult process.
Right.
Your senses are limited. There are eagles which can see much better than you. There are dogs which can hear much better than you. There are so many other animals and creatures around which have better senses. So that means your senses are limited. And your mind operates based on the senses. Therefore, the mind can only be limited. And it can never see anything comprehensively because of the limitation. So it is fragmented. So anything that comes out of something which is limited and fragmented can never be whole, can never be total.
Yeah. We'll take just a couple more questions.
Yeah.
Because of the time.
Yeah, factor. Okay.
Right.
When we say moksha isn't to be aimed at nor achievable, but it is just the reality. How do we value various practices? Yajna and yaga have a different role, sir.
Yeah.
If you see the Bhagavad Gita, in itself has very clearly mentioned that yajna is specifically to attain certain objectives, including what is called as heaven, and it is performed. It's a scientific experiment. It's basically a scientific experiment which is performed with a particular objective in mind. The Bhagavad Gita itself says, I can't really immediately quote that now, but the Bhagavad Gita itself very clearly says that after performing an yajna and attaining whatever you want, after exhausting the merit of that yajna, you come back again to undergo the same process again. To undergo the same process. So the value of practices like yajna and yaga are very limited and meant for very specific purposes.
Right.
Okay.
Karma kanda. Right.
Yeah, karma kanda. It refers to the karma action, whereas we are talking about kevala jnana.
Right. And there is, I think, towards the end, there are one or two questions, and then we will end it because we are already over time. And so there is a comment which, there is a question which somebody says, when one is empty of content of consciousness, then what is left of pure eternal Brahman?
No, see,
is in itself, what is the utility? That is one interesting comment.
Sir, the problem is, as I said, when we extend this thought process and imagination, we only come about with such questions. The point is, see, I am stuck in a room which is completely closed.
Yes.
Now, somebody has told me that there is great light, there is great illumination, there is heat, there is whatnot outside. Now, how does that affect me when I am enclosed? The point I am trying to make is, we are actually putting the cart before the horse by raising some such questions, in the sense that the mind is generally compared to a monkey, because it is the nature of the monkey not to leave the branch which it is holding and jump onto the other branch unless it is confident that it will be able to catch the other branch. The mind also behaves in this manner. If I ask the monkey, or if I ask somebody to jump simply and don't bother, nobody would jump. So the mind by itself, by its nature, has this element of trying to know what is beyond it before coming to it.
Right. Exactly.
So what happens is, the only purpose is emptying the content of consciousness.
Excellent points you brought today, sir.
Then you are not bothered about whether it is pure eternal Brahman or whatever it is. See, Brahman is only a word. Brahman is only a symbol.
Right.
What does it convey to me? If I quote the Taittiriya Upanishad and tell you Satyam, Anantam, Jnanam, Brahma, it is Satyam, Anantam and Jnanam, and Brahma is the symbol for it. See, the mind can only operate through symbols.
Yes.
But the ultimate truth is beyond all these things. That is where the Mandukya Upanishad comes into picture.
Probably we shouldn't go into Mandukya Upanishad right now, because we are about 10 minutes over time.
Beyond that.
And so you have so much material that you can share. I'm sure we will have more opportunities for us to discuss this in more detail in some other forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Sorry for shooting beyond the time.
That's okay. But right now, we will end it. We will start all over again. If people want to get in touch with you, can they get in touch with you?
I can share my mobile number and email ID if you want in the chat. So, or Nitin has it.
Nitin has it. Okay. I'll ask them. Probably easiest thing is, if you are interested in getting in touch with Krishnapani Garu, please contact Nitin Sridhar of Indica Moksha. That is the best way to be able to do that. Thank you for a wonderful, wonderful speech tonight, sir. And tomorrow morning in India time, and tonight in California or United States time, we have another wonderful talk coming up, Nature of Jiva and Ishvara according to Vedanta, by Dr. Ganesh Ishwar Bhatt. There are very few talks left in this particular Oneness Festival. Please attend. And by the way, you might not know that there are lots of speeches that are recorded already. Like, for example, if you want to go through Krishnapani ji's talk again, that is available on YouTube. Similarly, all the 4 years of YouTube sessions and festival talks are available. Please visit them. Thank you very much. You have a wonderful day, wonderful evening, and for some of you, wonderful rest of the afternoon. Namaste.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.